This episode of Engineering the Future is brought to you by Manulife, OSPE's life and health insurance partner. Thousands of engineering professionals trust the protection of Engineers Canada-sponsored insurance plans. With affordable association rates and flexible plan options, we think there could be a plan that's right for you and your family. To learn more about these exclusive life and health insurance plans, visit manulife.ca/OSPE.
This podcast is brought to you by OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers in the engineering community in Ontario.
Welcome to Engineering the Future, a podcast presented by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I am your host, Jerome James. This is part one of a special three-part series. Given the critical role that government plays in setting the agenda for the engineering ecosystem in Ontario, we invited all four candidates from the Ontario Liberal leadership race to share their vision for the future of our province and to discuss the vital role engineers and organizations can play in shaping that future. We're very happy to be joined by three of them, MPs Yasir Naqvi, Erskin-Smith, and MPP Ted Hsu. From the housing crisis to climate change, join us as we explore the intersection of engineering expertise and provincial politics in Ontario. Our next candidate is Ted Hsu, MPP for Kingston and the Islands. He is a former Liberal MP and was first elected to the provincial legislature in 2022. Ted, welcome to Engineering the Future.
Hey, it's great to be here with you, Jerome.
Let's just jump right into it. As you know, Ontario is in a housing crunch at the moment. If you were Premier of Ontario, what are some first steps your government would take to, correct home ownership, make it more affordable?
Well, in the short term, there are people we have to protect. 50% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So in the short term, we have rent control in Ontario. We'll have to continue with that to protect people in the short term. But in the longer term, we have to build more housing. And we can start by making it legal to build more housing. And what I mean by that is we want to legislate the right to build medium density housing. And we want to create mixed neighborhoods with buildings of different sizes and different living arrangements, apartments, townhouses, as well as single detached homes. It's the families are different sizes, they have different needs, and we should be able to provide for all of them. But we've got to build a lot more housing. And I want to build density in cities because I want to stop urban sprawl. And that's also because I have another policy, which is to protect prime agricultural land. All of these things fit together, and you can't consider housing in isolation.
So building more houses, infrastructure planning is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, making sure that we have good transportation. Public transit is important to making housing work. If people have easy transport, they can get to work and get to the other things they need to travel to without using automobiles so much. And that will allow us to have denser housing. So we want to do things like connect communities with a world-class public transit system, whether it's buses in smaller cities or it's expanding GO and the transit system, Toronto transit system in the GTA.
Excellent. As we move towards Canada's commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, what actions would your government take to achieve this target in Ontario?
To me, the thing I would focus on first is to stop burning natural gas for baseload power. Now I have to take a few steps back because in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to electrify our economy. So we're going to be electrifying transportation. We're going to be electrifying home heating, starting in the south of Ontario and moving up to the north as the technology gets better for very cold climates. And we're going to be electrifying industry. So all of these new electric vehicle plants and battery plants are going to need a lot of electricity. We're going to need electricity for industrial processes like steel. And just today I was reading an article about the fact that we would be needing a lot more electricity if people are going to be using artificial intelligence more, because it requires a lot of computing power. We've already experienced this a little bit with Bitcoin. And if we're relying on artificial intelligence, we're going to be relying on a lot more computing power. That's going to rely more on electricity. So that sets the context for trying to produce electricity that is clean and affordable and reliable. And the Ford government's plan currently is to rely on, in the short term, in the next 5 years, 10 years, on building a lot more natural gas plants. But that's going backwards in climate change. The Ford government lost so much time. At the beginning of its mandate in 2018, they canceled renewable energy projects, actually paid to dismantle them. They stopped conservation programs. They did not get going on energy storage. So we've got to build out energy storage, which allows you to use more solar and wind power. And then there are other opportunities, a little bit less of the total fraction of our electricity needs, but there's bioenergy and there's geothermal energy. And there are projects that have happened recently to work in those areas. But the main thing is to replace the base load natural gas generation with solar and wind power. And we need the energy storage to make these intermittent storage sources of renewable energy possible. And, wind and solar by themselves, so this is before you take into account the storage, they're actually much, much cheaper than any other source of energy right now because the technology has developed. And we have to move quickly. There's scientists say we have to cut our emissions by half by 2030. And the next election is in 2026. So that's a third of the way to 2030. So one of the things I say is we cannot be campaigning by waving a piece of paper and saying, this is the world's greatest climate change plan, because we can't throw away 1/3 of the time, which we have precious little of. Wait for the next election. So I'm going to be, because I have a seat in Queen's Park, I'm going to be pushing and shoving the Ford government to do as much as it can about climate change before the next election. I think we owe it to people to try as hard as we can before the next election.
So you're ultimately saying that time is of the essence right now to making a difference.
Time is of the essence. And that reminds me that the 2 or 3 years that the Ford government lost when they first took office and they canceled the renewable energy conservation and they did not get going on storage, that's going to cost us a lot of money. Because after the pandemic, the cost of all sorts of heavy equipment is up a lot. We know that just from everyday things around our own houses, but the cost of heavy equipment to generate energy and to transmit energy, that's gone up a lot. And then the United States went and passed the IRA. It's an act in the United States that spends a lot of money building out renewable energy and energy transmission and other forms of energy generation in the United States. And so when it comes to buying these things, Ontario is now at the back of the line behind the United States. And that's going to make us pay even more. And what's worse is that I was talking to some people who work in the energy field. The immense spending in the United States is actually, they're hiring away Canadian experts to work on U.S. energy projects. And so we're even losing our people to that.
And that dovetails nicely into my next question, which is, what kinds of jobs do you foresee engineers taking on in this future, in this more sustainable future, to help in this transition?
Well, one of the things that we need to do that's not easy to do is we have to build out the grid. We have to build out not only the interprovincial, the regional grid, but we have to build out local grids. If people are going to have a battery, for example, at home, and it may even be their automobile, they need to have a grid so that they can discharge their battery during peak times and displace generation from say a natural gas plant. I can see a lot of people charging these batteries maybe when the sun is shining or at night when energy is cheap because the demand is low, and then discharging them at peak times. So in order to do that, we need to build out the local grid. Right now, if everybody on a typical older street in Ontario, if everybody were to buy an electric vehicle and plug it in, the local grid might not be able to handle that. And then add on to that, everybody converting from natural gas heating to heat pumps. And that's going to increase even more the demands on electricity on the local grid. So we have to build out the local grid as well as the provincial, the province-wide grid. If we want to attract industry to Ontario, we're going to have to make sure that we have reliable, affordable, and clean electricity. A lot of companies want to locate in a jurisdiction where they have clean electricity and where they can tell their own customers that whatever they produced was produced using clean electricity, non-emitting sources of generation.
What do you see as the government's role to play in this energy transition?
To coordinate everything, first of all. So there are a lot of answers to this. So, for example, if we want to build energy storage or put up a renewable energy project, we need the cooperation of local municipalities. So it's the role of government to reach out to local municipalities to gain the support of local municipalities. And I think the important thing is to engage them proactively. We always need communities helping out to encourage people, for example, to get involved in conservation programs or to to convert from natural gas to heat pumps in their homes, to set up rules so that we don't automatically install natural gas heaters for every new house that gets built. In some communities around the world, they have said all new builds have to not use natural gas for heating. So I think there's a big role for government as well as the sort of on the very large scale. I think it's important to keep the price on greenhouse gas emissions. So federally, it's the carbon price, but I know some provinces are fighting what they call the carbon tax. But it's really important for governments to not give burning fossil fuels an unfair advantage, because that's going to kill a lot of initiatives to switch over to renewable energy or energy conservation.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. At OSPE, we're here for you, making sure government, media, and the public are listening to the voice of engineers. You can learn more at ospe.on.ca.
As society moves away from fossil fuels, this gap in energy will be made up through electrification.
Yes.
Some estimates say that Ontario may need to more than double its current electricity output to meet future demands. What would a future Liberal government under your leadership do to solve this looming issue?
Yeah, if you just look at all the megawatts we need, it's pretty clear. We are converting our whole economy to electricity away from fossil fuels. And I think one important thing that we should be doing is we should be continuing to refurbish the nuclear plants. So we just had one reactor refurbished at Bruce, another one at Darlington. And those refurbishments actually came in a little bit earlier than scheduled and on budget. So that's a really good sign. The refurbishment will continue for several more years as the other reactors go in turn. But I also think we should be building another large reactor at the Bruce C site. Bruce has 4 sites, A, B, C, and D. A and B have reactors, C and D are empty. And I think it makes a lot of sense to build another CANDU reactor on Site C, because we need so many megawatts of energy in order to fulfill our greenhouse gas targets.
So major projects going forward, government needs to coordinate a lot of different moving parts. More engineers are going to be required to take on these types of skilled jobs of the future. Do you foresee an increase in scholarships, innovation grants to aid in this process?
I am very interested in encouraging innovation. Encouraging, when I see a new apartment building going up in downtown Kingston and that uses geothermal energy for heating and cooling, I get very excited. So I want to make sure that we have a lot of engineers who are thinking about that and trying to build these things efficiently and inexpensively, and always thinking about what's the next best, what's the next improvement that we can make. So I think we need engineers in that. We need engineers in the agri-food industry to see what we can do there about energy. I visited a farm that was a dairy farm, but they had a biodigester operation as well. So building that out is something that's going to happen in the next few decades, and so we'll need engineers to do that. Again, the whole energy system needs a lot of changes, a lot of upgrades, and so engineers are going to be used everywhere. And not only that, like software engineers. So I said earlier, artificial intelligence is going to use a lot of electricity, or there's going to be other sort of computing intensive ways of using electricity, and so engineers in software and so on are going to be thinking about what's the trade-off between whatever application we have for computing power and the energy that it takes. And sometimes an improvement in some algorithm can save you a lot of computing time and money. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for engineers there.
Switching gears a little bit here, we hear a lot all the time about the overabundance of lawyers and business people who end up getting elected to government. Would you agree that we need more technically minded people as engineers, such as engineers interested in politics, getting elected and contributing to policy decisions?
I do. I think it's very important to have a diversity of elected members. I would say right now, there's certainly in the provincial legislature, you get a lot of candidates who are teachers or healthcare professionals, and that's natural because a big chunk of the provincial budget is health and education. But I think that a healthy caucus is one that has people from all sorts of different professions, and right now it's part of the. It's very hard in engineering to kind of leave and then come back. The same in any of the STEM fields, it's hard to leave and come back. It's a bit easier in healthcare and education and law, for example, to leave and come back. But it is very important to have that different point of view, different way of thinking. When you have tough decisions and you're getting together in a group to try to make these decisions, it's important to have people who think differently, because one of the worst things that can happen in a group is that you all start thinking the same way and relying on each other instead of thinking for yourself. And I think people with a STEM background, engineers in particular, are used to thinking about practical issues. It's important to have them contribute, but it requires, because getting elected can involve spending a lot of time off work, or at least building a team of people who can help you if you can't campaign during the day. It's important to know that a lot of work is involved, and I think the profession can try to help individual members who want to run by making it easier to have a day job in engineering and run for office and on the nights and the weekends and have that. I mean, I think employers should try to provide that flexibility when possible, but it's something that should be encouraged. And I think people need to be asked to run. I'm the only one of the leadership candidates with a technical background, a background in science, and I will definitely be talking to potential candidates and asking them to run, and I'll be wanting a diversity of candidates. And I feel very comfortable speaking to scientists and engineers, and I will be asking them to consider running. And then I know that sometimes people have to be asked multiple times. So I'm going to be going back to people and saying, sure, like you should run. Think about it. Here's what you have to do. I definitely want to increase the people in the legislature with STEM backgrounds.
How important is it for government to work with organizations like the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers? What role should they play at the provincial level?
I think it's important to help develop policy for a sanity check, because a lot of times you have groups that are lobbying and saying, we want you to spend money on this, or we want you to spend money on that. But there are real limits. There are technical limits. There are real cost limits. There's a finite amount of resources that you have to distribute between different causes. And one thing that engineers, the professional societies, can do is to provide independent, competent analysis of different policy issues. So just, for example, looking at something that we've just spoken about, we could say, we could ask engineers to say, well, what is a reasonable, make sure you get a bunch of engineers together who are not connected to any government agencies like IESO or anybody else, and tell us what you think would be a good plan going forward to build out the grid, the local grid, and how much would it cost, and what's put your best professional credentials on the line to justify your guesses, and that can feed into policy so that politicians have reasonable policy. And if something that we're promising is not reasonable, then we need people like engineers to say, no, we don't think that's realistic. It's going to cost a lot more than you think, or it's going to take a lot longer than you think. Because the advocacy groups are going to cheer and they're going to say, yeah, you are on our side. And I think we need engineers to say, okay, guys, reasonably, this is what we think can actually be done. And I think that's really important for good government.
And finally, what would you say is the best way for engineers, or anyone for that matter, in Ontario to get involved in the political process?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to, if you're already voting and following the issues, the first thing to do is to get involved in a political campaign. Find a candidate that you like. And I always recommend volunteering to do door knocking. And the reason for that is that when you knock on doors and you talk to people, you get a sense of how people decide how they're going to vote, or even whether they're going to vote. And if you understand how people decide on their vote, you already understand a lot about how politics works. Just as an example, one of the trade-offs in politics is sometimes you know what you want to do. You say, okay, here's 10 things that we think will solve this problem. But when you sit down and you decide what you're going to do, politicians also have to ask the question, how many of these things can we explain to the public? How many of these things will the opposition not be able to argue against because it's complicated, and they will oversimplify and provide an argument that will cost us votes, even though it's wrong. So as a politician, you not only decide what you think is the right thing to do, but you decide how to communicate it and what fraction of what you want to do can you communicate? And then you end up implementing the things that you can communicate. So when you sit down and decide on some issue, very often you have a dual conversation. One is, what do we think the right thing to do is? And the second thing is, how do we explain it to people? And if we can't explain it to people, a lot of the times we don't do something, or we wait until we can figure out how to explain it to people. And that's the thing. That's a sense that you get if you go and knock on doors for a campaign. So that's I think a first step that I would encourage everybody to get involved in is knock on doors, talk to voters, and get a feel for how elections work. And that's invaluable, and it's a great way to start.
Ted, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about these important issues.
I could go on and on. I'm very passionate about all these things. I want to fix the system. I don't want to fix little things. That's why I'm running for leader. Is there are so many things that I think need some an overhaul, need change, and I know that I can contribute to that change. I know that I can do a good job. I like doing a good job because of my science background, just like engineers take pride in their technical work. And in fact, are held to high professional standards for their technical work. That's the kind of approach that I want to take as the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party and the next Premier of Ontario.
This is the end of part 2 of our 3-part series. Once again, we've learned how critical engineers are when it comes to solving some of the biggest issues facing Ontario and the importance of getting involved. And a good place to start is becoming an OSPE member. We're the voice of engineers in Ontario, and together we can make a difference to improve the quality of life in our province. Thanks again for listening. I am your host, Jerome James. You've been listening to Engineering the Future, and we'll see you next time.
From all of us at OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.